Thank you very much for turning out. I was very impressed that I got to be distinguished just by walking down to the AD lab. So I think maybe more of you should do that. You can be distinguished too. So the stuff I'm talking about today is not only my own work, but this is really the work of everybody across the user group. So I think that they all deserve the credit, and some of them who are here can answer some of the questions better than I can.
Are they all distinguished also?
I think so. Yes, their names are here. So. I think I can share the distinguishment. So I can introduce myself. I've been here at Almaden since 2002, so almost 12 years, it'll be in November. And I've worked in the user group the whole time on a wide variety of topics. I think the most significant piece of work is the book that I did with Esser and Paul and John Bailey, based on ethnographic field studies of IT workers and following people around with video cameras and trying to understand how people understand complex systems. And that's kind of the thread of all of my work. I actually got my PhD in the database group from the University of Wisconsin, and there I was concerned with really complex metadata and how to help people understand metadata. And after that, I worked on data mining and visualization, again, helping people understand complexity. The job with IT workers is about really understanding how groups of people understand groups of machines and systems.
Who's your advisor?
Yanis Enides. So yes, I worked with, or Renee Miller was my academic sibling. And so, but since 2011 or so, I and actually eventually just about all the rest of the user group has been working on social media and understanding people through social media. Now, I think I don't need to spend any real time on this slide. Social media is big, it's huge, it is really interesting and really important. It's a huge opportunity because literally hundreds of millions of people, or possibly billions every day, are putting information out on social media, information about themselves, about their relationships, about their interactions with other people. There are things such as their language use, the topics they talk about, the sentiment towards the topics they talk about. They share pictures. There are all kinds of behaviors, interactions, people connecting with other people, saying things to other people, repeating other people's messages. And really, I mean, none of these activities are particularly novel. I mean, it isn't something that you wouldn't see around a campfire 10,000 years ago. But suddenly, it's all in public. It's all out there, available and amenable to analysis by computers. So for us in the world of big data, and also in trying to understand people for the user group, this is really interesting. Now, I first want to say that there are many, many different endeavors within IBM and outside of IBM in social media. So this is just one small part of this huge effort. There are things such as sentiment and topic analysis, which people over in B-Wing on the first floor are doing a lot about. Social network and influencer analysis. People in Haifa, people in Watson, people in many other companies trying to understand who influences who. If you want to spread your message, what's the right way to do that? Bogdan and Mauricio talking about linking social media with existing customer data. How do you find, if you know who somebody is in the real world, can you find them on Twitter, say? And all of these are important, and all of these are interesting and useful, but that's not what I'm going to be talking about today. What I'm talking about is understanding the traits of individual human beings from their language and behavior on social media. So this is sort of complementary to everything else. It's yet another way of using social media to understand things better. Now, I think when I start off, I can just give you some examples of work in this area. I think some very interesting work that got me started on this was work by Jalal Mahmood and Jeff Nichols on finding out who would be willing to answer a question from a stranger on social media and being able to predict that. People have also looked at things such as basic human values, which are motivating factors that a person might have, understanding that from linguistic patterns. My colleague here, Jolyn Cheng, worked on that. Understanding personality, standard psychological metrics from linguistic patterns on blogs or behavior on Twitter. But then it starts to get a little creepy because then you have work identifying political views or sexual orientation or drug use from the things that people like on Facebook. Or how about predicting narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, I'm not sure how to say that, but the dark triad from Twitter language and behavior. Or even, predicting postpartum depression. It is possible to get really creepy really fast with this. And so when I have been talking about this in public, I like to talk about the issue of privacy because I think this is something that really should be an important factor when we're working in this area. Social media is kind of like the public square because it's all these activities that are going on sort of in public, but all of a sudden all the conversations and activities are recorded, except maybe some of these private social media sites. So this is scary, and I think but the evidence that I've seen is that social media users don't necessarily understand and appreciate just how public social media is. I ran an experiment where I was looking at people traveling to New York City last summer, and I would send them a tweet, and so, more than one person said, "How did you know I'm traveling to New York City?" They didn't seem to appreciate the fact that when they said in a tweet, "I'm going to New York City next week," that anybody in the world could look at that. They don't know the extent of the data they expose, because it isn't just the content, but you can infer a lot of things from what somebody's putting in social media. And then there's the problem of, well, okay, as we would generally, when we're running studies like this, like to get informed consent from our participants in our studies. But if you're studying, 1 million people, how do you do that? How do you get accurate informed consent from people around the world who are just throwing this data out into the four winds? And especially, when I talk to corporate customers, how do you avoid creeping out your clients? Now, 2 years ago, there was an article in the New York Times about Target stores and how, through some very nice analytics, they had discovered that through purchase patterns, they could very accurately predict when women were pregnant. And if you're selling stuff, that's really important. If you're a regular human being, that's really creepy. And they didn't make that connection. They didn't really, I think that if they talked about predicting when somebody was going to retire or graduate from high school or 100 other things, then it would have sounded much less harmful. But there is a huge potential to creep people out. I don't have the answers on how to do this in every case, but I think that if you're doing work in this area, it's important to think about this from the very beginning. Think that, well, if your research is picked up by the New York Times, is it going to creep people out? Is it going to worry people? Is there any individually identifiable information released? Could the results cause harm to people? And how do the benefits compare to the downsides? If you're inferring your Machiavellian instincts, or maybe you don't want to identify individuals that way. You certainly want to understand the cost benefit. If you're just using this for deciding whether or not to send somebody a coupon in the mail, that's one thing. If you're using it to decide whether or not to hire somebody, that's a very big other issue.
But I think almost anything could cause harm, even if it's innocuous, because this guy didn't tell his wife he was going to go to blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
And now she finds out.
Yes, so I agree, and I think the goal is to approach this in such a way that well, if you're collecting the data, maybe you need to collect it anonymously, or collect it in such a way that other people don't find out that this person is going on a trip. Maybe you can send them a message, but you do it in an anonymous way. I don't know, but I think it's important to consider. And I think the other thing is that it is probably best to be upfront and open about what you're doing. Use some kind of opt-in situation where you tell people, well, we can improve the offers we send to you will send you less stuff and have it be more relevant if you opt in, if you let us do this kind of analysis. And I think that people would be much happier with that because you say what you're doing what you're doing, and they know about it. IBM in January released a survey. They'd surveyed 30,000 people, and slightly more than a third of them said that they would be willing to share their presence on social media with a business in exchange for more customized service, for improved service. So there are hints that, yes, people would be willing to do this, and I think if you did it well, then it could work out. I mean, I think, but because it can be creepy, I think it's important to consider that at the starting point of any effort in this. So a lot of our work has involved Twitter data, and that is because by default, every single tweet is visible to the entire planet. So that's great as a researcher. A lot of people don't realize that, so they get a little bit surprised if you actually try and reach out to them based on what they've said. Twitter does provide a search API where you can retrieve tweets related to keywords associated with certain users occurring at certain times or geographies. So there's a lot, and so you can get certain amounts of data that way. And if you need more data, you can buy it. And the AD Lab here has I think something like a year worth of 10% of all tweets. So there's a lot of data available for analysis that you can get at, which is great. Twitter has a number of problems. The 140 character limit for each message leads to a very idiosyncratic style. The penetration of Twitter in the US is only about 20%, and only about half of those people actually use it. So you're not going to get a big cross-section of the population. And then there are all kinds of non-human accounts, so robots, spammers, businesses. So there are certainly limitations. But I think the research I'm talking about today can be applied to other platforms where people are expressing themselves and communicating among friends. The foundation, or the general approach that we're taking, is psycholinguistics. And this is something that comes out of psychology, where for at least 10 years they've had a lot of ideas about how the intrinsic characteristics of an individual come out in their communication style, and often at a subliminal level, that they don't realize, that people don't realize that when you are speaking, when you're writing, when you're communicating in general, certain words like pronouns, adverbs, articles are different depending upon your intrinsic traits. And this is for all kinds of traits: gender, social class, thinking style, and I mean, it's fascinating. Men tend to use articles more than women. Men tend to use the pronoun we more than women. It's sort of all these fascinating stuff, all these fascinating aspects that people don't realize. And this, I mean, a lot of the work that we're using is based on the work of James Pennebaker out of the University of Texas. He came and gave a talk here at the beginning of the year. He wrote this great book, The Secret Life of Pronouns, which just describes experiment after experiment that he's done, showing all these different correlations in language use and characteristics of language and characteristics of people. He put together a dictionary called Luke, L-I-W-C, which we've used and licensed and worked on enhancing, which sort of makes the analysis process simpler. And then we've also looked at behavioral analysis, image analysis, all from social media. Any questions so far, aside from Ron? Well, Ron can ask a question.
Okay, good. What about women's words they use instead of men?
Sorry?
Men say we.
Let's see. I'm not remembering which word.
Want to repeat the question, please?
Oh, okay, yes. So Ron asked which words women use more than men, and I'm blanking out on that. I. Well, I more than we, yes. But there are other categories as well. So, let's see. One of my favorite studies is he's at the University of Texas, and he has access to all the application essays for all the students who come to the University of Texas. And so he analyzed many years of that data, and he was able to predict academic outcomes to a high level. And apparently, people who use is sort of who use language that in terms of classifying things do much better over 4 years. People who use language that classifies things in their application essay have better grades 4 years later than the people who didn't. And apparently his theory is that a lot of undergraduate academia is all about learning classifications, you know, this versus that, how to divide up the world of knowledge. And so the people who are coming in already with that mindset about dividing things into different categories do better. You know, just from that one essay, you can tell that they'll do better 4 years later. So.
Two categories, people who divide things into categories.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I think the aspects of our work are things such as model construction and refinement. So, you know, there are psychological metrics for all different kinds of psychological metrics. There's personality, values, many different things for which there exist questionnaires, tests that you can give to people to evaluate them along those dimensions. And so things that we can do is, well, we can give some group of people a test, we can analyze their linguistic patterns, and if we find correlations, we can build a predictive model saying, okay, for personality, we can predict your personality using these aspects of your language use. You know, we have created models in our group, in the user group, for basic human values, which are motivating factors, fundamental needs, which describe aspects of products that will resonate with a person, emotional state, some composite metrics such as whether somebody's willing to answer a question. We've worked on refining Big Five personality. And then sort of once you have all that, then another big important question is, well, how do you use this? I mean, you know, maybe I could predict how extroverted you are, but is that actionable in any way, shape, or form? And that's where the model validation comes in. So we want to find aspects of real-world behavior and then see how that correlates with these inferred traits. So the kinds of features that come out of social media data, you know, we have the linguistic, such as the Loop Dictionary that Penn and Baker put together. We've got behavioral, which is also actually very important in some of these models, where you can see how often somebody posts, how many friends they have, how often they respond to other people versus just writing original posts. And then things such as images. Do they post images of people, images of outdoor scenes, that sort of thing. And then from those objective features, you can have inferred features such as psychological metrics such as personality, values, needs, emotional state. This is a profile from our system. It's an IBMer who lives in Switzerland and is really happy to let me put him up like this. So I'm very grateful to him. I've used him in demos going back to Investor Day more than a year ago, and he seems to not mind. So we've got Big Five personality, we've got 5 top-level features, and then each of those has 6 sub-level facets. We've got the motivating factors, as somebody motivated by improving their social status, or maybe motivated by tradition or the status quo, the aspects of products that will resonate with him, and behavioral aspects like when does he tweet. Now, he's in a different time zone, so he's never online afternoon. So if I wanted to engage with him, I could use that behavioral metric. So there are studies that have shown that personal traits are predictive of buying decisions, of brand preferences. So we do believe that these are useful in the marketing context. It was IBM's Unica brand marketing software that originally funded this research, although it certainly seems to have broader applications going forward. But marketing is sort of the very first application that we tried. So this is some work that Leon, where are you? There he is. Okay. So this is one example of work that Leon did last year. This is a paper that he presented last month. And the idea is he found a bunch of people from the IBM Academy who were on Twitter. He asked them to take personality tests. About 400 of them were willing to take personality tests and share their Twitter, their presence on Twitter. And so we could run the models and then we could compare the results of the tests with the linguistic features on Twitter. And because there are 5 different features, he ended up doing an RV coefficient, and which is a way of saying how close a multidimensional Pearson correlation. And so for about 80% of the population, the RV coefficient was high enough to indicate a significant correlation between the inferred personality and the actual results of the personality test. And we haven't really yet figured out what's going on with those last 20% of people. That's one thing that we need to figure out. We took their language, we applied a model that we have for predicting personality from their language feature, and then compared the output of that to the output that we get from giving them a personality test.
So humans judging personality test.
Well, or it's something that comes out of psychology where it says, this questionnaire will, with certain reliability, give you what psychologists describe as these personality traits that are supposed to be reasonably stable over time. So, another example is the idea of sort of going into the Twitter domain and going more into behavior. A company that we were working with wanted to run an ad campaign, and they did a focus group of their customers, and they found that they could divide their customers into 3 different broad categories with regard to their attitudes towards fashion. And so this is what they interviewed these people. They had a number of different statements that the people agreed with or didn't agree with, and they also found that these different groups of people tended to read different magazines. So I ran this experiment. I said, okay, well, I'm curious. Are the followers of these magazines actually different in their behavior on Twitter? So this is really interesting because what I'm looking for is actually understanding, is the behavior of people who like these magazines measurably different in the real world? So I took 10,000 followers of each of the magazines. I computed all the personality and values traits. So along the x-axis, I've got 50 different traits. And then for each magazine, I have the average value of that trait or the average value of that trait for the followers of that magazine. And the magazines are colored by which category. There are green magazines, red magazines, and blue magazines. And you can see, well, okay, for the agreeableness, personality metric, all the values converge. They're all the same. But if I look, say, at conscientiousness, well, the people who follow the red magazines score higher, and then purple, which crosses the red and blue boundary, is kind of in the middle, and then green is at the bottom. And sort of the opposite comes with neuroticism. The red magazines are lower, and the blue and green magazines are higher. So, this is really interesting. It sort of shows that in the real world, people who follow these magazines actually use language measurably different, which comes out in our models through these inferred traits. So they are behaving differently, which I find really fascinating.
Did you try to figure out why people who read this magazine tend to be neurotic? I mean, what's in those magazines?
Or is it that the magazine attracts neurotic people?
Well, that's what I'm thinking.
Yes. And that I think would require somebody with a greater understanding of psychology. I think the differences are interesting, statistically significant, and actionable, but as to what it means, that's, I think, requires somebody else to answer that question. So going a little bit deeper, Walmart and Target are 2 very large retailers in the United States. They have tens of millions of customers, hundreds of thousands of followers on Twitter, millions of people who like them on Facebook. And so I was interested. Well, they do seem to have different reputations. So I wanted to see, well, are the people who follow these brands actually different? So I took, I think it was 20,000 followers of each of these brands. And I measured the Luke scores, which describe categories of words. And I found that, well, yes, I mean, because I have so many followers, of course I'm going to get statistically significant differences, but in many cases the results were actually reasonably large as well. So 52 out of the 68 Luke categories of language had statistically significant differences, but again, about 13 out of those 68 had a z-value of the difference greater than 0.1. So more than a tenth of a standard deviation difference in the means. So, how are they different? How are Target followers different from Walmart followers? And I mean, I don't even know if they shop there. It's just that they follow them on Twitter. So I have people who follow Target use words related to time and inclusion a lot more than 2/10 of standard deviation different. People who follow Walmart swear a lot more, 2/10 of the standard deviation. Like, wow, okay, Target followers talk about eating, Walmart followers use anger words. This is kind of feeding into my stereotypical views of the kind of people who go to these stores. But I think really, I suspect that it's really more cultural differences, perhaps. But I don't know the real reason. But so for all of these different word categories, types of words, I've got more than a tenth of a standard deviation difference between the followers of Walmart and the followers of Target. So, I can infer personality traits, and it says, well, okay, people who follow Target seem to be more agreeable, more motivated by helping other people. People who follow Walmart are more motivated by pleasurable experiences. People who follow Walmart are more conscientious, more organized. People who follow Target are more motivated by social status. So, it's feeding into my own stereotypical views, but this is objective measures. So.
What are your stereotypical views?
Well, that Target is a higher end store that sells sort of more fashionable stuff, while Walmart sells the lowest cost possible stuff. And let's see. So I was able to build a classifier. I mean, so while these differences are significant, then the question is, well, is it predictive? And they're moderately predictive. I cannot distinguish 100% between one group and the other, but I could build a model that could distinguish Target followers versus Walmart followers just from their language with an accurate, so random chance would be 50%, and I could get in the low 60s. So it's not a great classifier, but it shows that, wow, there really is some predictive power to this approach. And I think that comes back to the point I said at the beginning, which is that the stuff we're doing here is complementary to everything else that's going on, all the other kinds of analytics that are going on. This gives you another view onto people, but it isn't the only view that you want to have. So this is the work that really got me started with this. That I don't think Jalal or Jeff Nichols are here, but this was some really nice work that they got me thinking about analyzing language for the very first time. And so what Jalal and Jeff wanted to know is, will people on a social media platform like Twitter answer random questions from a stranger? And why would you want to ask questions? Well, there's a lot of information that people put into social media, but there's more information that's in their heads that they don't put into social media. So if you want the answer to the question, you might do better just asking somebody rather than crawling over endless tweets trying to find the answer to a particular question. You can also get the answer much more quickly because you ask them and they answer. And so,
what are the kind of questions you're talking about?
well, I'll show you in just a moment.
Good.
And so the things I were interested in were, will people answer questions from strangers? Can you incentivize them to answer, and how good are the answers? So they created two different experiments. One was called the TSA Tracker. The website is still up, but they aren't actually running it anymore. And the idea was, if somebody tweeted that they were at the airport, they would ask them, well, how long was your wait line? And then there was product reviews where you would see, if you could see somebody with an indication that they owned a particular product, like a camera, you'd ask them questions about the camera. So the TSA Tracker, somebody would tweet, they'd say, I'm at Dulles International Airport, and they would automatically detect airport names and airport codes, and they'd say, send them a message saying, if you went through the security line, how long was the wait time? And somebody might respond, and we'd send them a link to the website where all the data was being collected. So you could look, it was a map of the country, you could see all the airports and what the average wait time had been as reported by these people on Twitter. And so there was two versions of the question, one with an incentive saying, hey, if you answer us, it will help other travelers, and one where we just said, hey, tell us, please. The one on product reviews, we'd look for indications that there was somebody owned a particular camera, and then we'd ask them a random question about that camera. And then if they answered, then we'd ask them another random question. So the amazing thing about this is people actually replied, and a lot of them replied. Like 40% of the people replied to a random question from somebody they'd never heard of on Twitter. And the numbers vary for different reasons, but that's the gist of it. And the theory that Jalal came up with is that the people who respond, you need motive, means, and opportunity. You need somebody who's online, because of course they can't respond if they don't get the question. They need to have the information, and they need to be willing to answer a question from some random person out in the ether. Now, the original tweet filtering, they were only asking people about wait times to people who talked about being in an airport. So that means that they actually have the information, probably. And then behavioral and linguistic features were used to build models to find ready and willing. So you could look at how often they're online, how recently they've been online, and you can understand, oh, are they likely to be online right now when I ask them this question? Willing, however, is more interesting in that this is where personality first came in. That Jalal had read about this model where somebody was predicting personality from linguistics and social media, and so he thought, okay, I'll throw this into the mix. And when he built a model predicting response rates, he found that that there was a personality trait that was predictive of that. That was among the top features predicting whether or not somebody would reply.
Did you ask your questions via tweeting?
Yes. So somebody would tweet saying, I have a camera, or I'm at an airport, and then we'd send them a tweet saying, do you like the camera? Or how long was the wait time in security? So tried tuning the models based on all these features, and certainly including the personality traits. We could build, using the models, bring the response rate from 40% up to almost 70%. So in part by predicting that somebody would be online, but also in part predicting whether or not they would respond to a question from a stranger. So that's very interesting, and that was sort of the thing that got me started on this whole road. The next thing is an experiment I ran last summer. Direct marketing is something that IBM's Unica brand has software for managing marketing campaigns, and direct marketing is a huge problem. My favorite figure is that in 2012, according to the Direct Marketing Association, companies in the US spent $170 billion on direct marketing, and the conversion rate, which means that somebody responds and actually buys a product, averages around 2%. And it's lower for electronic channels, it's higher for direct mail and phone calls, but average is 2%.
Frequently, can you say roughly how you decide in advance a person would be willing to answer a question? How did you decide
Well,
in advance?
it was a combination of,
Like if they're an extrovert or...
well, I mean, let's see. So there was a communication feature of personality, which was correlated. There's also responsiveness, where you look at how often somebody replies to other people and how quickly they reply to other people on social media. So a behavioral feature and an inferred personality feature. So let's see. So back to direct marketing. So companies spend $170 billion more last year, I'm sure. And on average, 2% of the people actually buy the product, which suggests that companies have spent $165 billion or so annoying people, sending them the wrong message at the wrong time, to the wrong person. And so you don't have to move that very far to make billions of dollars. And if you move it far enough, you can imagine a world where, right now, marketing is a burden. It's this thing where we get all this email and all this junk mail and all these phone calls of people trying to sell us stuff. All these ads on TV. And I mean, imagine, maybe sometime in the future where instead of receiving thousands of marketing touches per week or month, you get only a few, but they're all relevant. They're all something you're interested in. Then suddenly marketing becomes a service. It's no longer a burden on you. It's no longer this pile of things that keeps flying at you, but it's actually a service where it says, hey, you might be interested in this, and you actually are. So I can agree. That would be the best possible outcome for this work. Yes?
So you are mentioning that most of these targeted marketing strategies are inaccurate. So what's the source of inaccuracy? Is it the source of data which is being fed into these strategies? Like, for example, if I'm doing a Google search, Google will personalize my search based on what I search, what my Gmail account, what kind of information is there, scanning them. So I guess, what's the problem here? Because you are targeting a particular source, which is social media. Is that going to help, or yeah?
Well, I mean, I'm quite sure that Google and Facebook are both using social data extracted from social media to try and improve the marketing messages that they give. But as far as I know, it's all limited at this point to topics and sentiments. So they say, oh, you searched on shoes, so I'm going to show you ads for shoes, and they don't seem to be able to connect to the fact that you already bought the shoes last week. They're still going to show you shoes for the next month or two, thinking that hopefully that maybe you're still in the market for shoes.
So I guess my question was, out of this 170 billion, how much is spent on the pamphlets which I receive in my mailbox, and random spams which I receive in my email inbox, versus the personalized search, which is more accurate?
Let's see. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, this is what the Direct Marketing Association puts out, this top line figure, and you have to pay $500 for the report, which has all the details. So I don't have the sub details on that. I mean, I think a big problem is that marketing segmentation usually happens by demographics and purchase history. So you bought X, Y, and Z, and you're 30 years old and you live in a big city, and therefore I'm going to target you with my new product. But there are a lot of differences among even people with the same demographics and the same geography. So, or maybe those things that you bought for relatives and not for yourself, and so you're really not interested in them yourself. And perhaps we can figure out things like, well, what is the personality profile of an early adopter versus somebody who's more conservative? You certainly can imagine putting together different personality traits to understand that, and that's something that the demographics is a very rough measure for coming up with right now. So let's see. So this study that we started last summer, we'll probably be running some more versions of it this summer, is the idea of actually engaging with real people on Twitter. And so we set up a website called Travelers Like Me, and the goal was to find people who were traveling and make them an offer and try different messages, different message types to see if they reply to our offer. And we tried different offers, and it turned out that in the end, the offer that we used was we offered them a recommendation site. So we said, we are a site that can give you customized travel recommendations. If you'd like to receive some of our recommendations, please follow us on Twitter. I did this using, there's a smart rule set for actually inferring that somebody is traveling, and so I was looking for people who on Twitter would say, I'm going to New York City, and I would do some manual filtering to try and make sure it was people who were actually sort of going on a tourist trip instead of just people who live in Brooklyn who were going into Manhattan for the night, say. and I would offer them this recommendation service. And in the end, the recommendation service wasn't actually personalized because it wasn't that smart. But I would give them random recommendations that I pulled off of Twitter. So it sort of fed upon itself. I would have searches going on looking for restaurant and hotel recommendations on Twitter, and then I'd give them to the people who were interested in recommendations. And a lot of them were very happy. They're like, "Oh yeah, I tried that restaurant. It was great. Thank you." But yeah, so people would talk about going to New York City in their tweets. I'd run it through Smart and some other filters. I'd infer traits, and then I'd send them one of three messages. I had a message related to shopping, a message related to social stuff, and the goal was to, and then I would record what kinds of responses. They might reply to me, they might retweet my tweet saying, "Hey, this is cool." They might favorite it, just meaning that they liked the idea. So I measured all these different kinds of response rates. And I don't really have time to go into the details, but it was sort of technically fairly challenging. But overall, about more than 6.5% actually clicked on the link that we provided to our website. 4.5% actually followed us, so that was kind of cool. Especially because electronic marketing tends to have very low response rates in the 0.01% range. So given the fact that we didn't even have a known brand, this was cool. And especially interesting is that the response rate was much higher among people for whom we inferred that they were high in openness to experience, which is a personality trait associated with intellect and curiosity. Curious people liked the idea of this online recommendation system. And also the response rate was higher among people who were low in neuroticism. Neuroticism is the personality trait that indicates how prone you are to negative emotions, how worried you are about negative outcomes. So people who weren't worried about negative outcomes were more likely to click on our link, follow us. So that's very encouraging. So that says, okay, yes, this is one way of helping find people who really be interested in this. We didn't, because of the relatively low response rate, even though we targeted several thousand people, we weren't able to get enough responses to statistically distinguish whether we got a different response rate to the different message types and the different personality types. But once again, we see that linguistic traits, or traits inferred from linguistic patterns, can predict the behavior of strangers. Now, the last example I'm going to give is from a client engagement. This is IBM Confidential, so we aren't allowed to talk about this outside IBM. So we have been working for the last 6 months or so with a very large retailer with tens of millions of customers, and they were interested in applying this, and in hopes of gaining further understanding of their customers and to see whether this would work for their needs. So this is not a paid engagement. We didn't charge them, but they gave us their entire customer list, 60 million distinct customers, and they gave us a year's worth of transaction data. And so I used Bugda and stuff, I guess he disappeared, to help find as many customers as I could. I got a little bit less than 1% of the customers. Or actually, I got more than 1% of the customers, but I found them on Twitter, but I only had about 450,000 who had enough tweets to do linguistic analysis on. So the goal of this was to say, okay, well, this retailer already knows what kinds of segments that they think about, but can we find subsegments? Can we say, oh, your VIP customers are actually grouped into different groups and you should treat them differently. You should send different messages or different offers to them. And then also there's the thought of, well, if you're a retailer, there might be somebody who has the potential to be a high value customer, but they're actually going off someplace else and buying those things elsewhere. So maybe you can identify those potential customers and discover, and you can give them offers and bring them in and make them high value customers. So yeah, so we had 60 million names, email addresses, physical addresses, a year's worth of transaction data, an item hierarchy. They had 35,000 product categories, millions of different products. And we used from the AD Lab 18 million Twitter profiles that Mauricio Hernandez had extracted from the 10% feed. And so yeah, so we got 450,000 guest portraits. And we looked at 5 different areas. I'm only going to talk about one due to limited time, which is the high-value guests. So this company already has 6 categories for their customers. They have all the way from least engaged all the way up to VIPs, and this is all defined in terms of the total amount, the total number of visits to the store, and the total amount that they spend per visit. And so I tried breaking it down a bunch of different ways. I found that I got that 1 and 2 are very similar to each other. 5 and 6 tend to be very similar to each other. 3 and 4 are sort of similar to each other. But I was interested in distinguishing this group from that group and then seeing, well, who among this category are similar so that they might be amenable to upsell. So
What is that?
upsell means that maybe this is somebody who's buying more stuff at a different store. They're going to a higher end store, or maybe they're just going to a different store to buy some category. And so upsell is you have somebody who comes in. Sometimes you give them an offer, you give them a coupon, you give them a rewards card, you give them something to get them to come in more often and buy more stuff. And so what we found is, well, I was able to build a model that between the high value and the low value customers could actually distinguish them with about a 75% precision, which was very pleasing. That those people really do use language differently, which was fascinating. And then also I was able to find some people from the moderate value guests who are similar to the high value guests. So from our high value guests, we were able to we ran some clustering, and we found that yes, there are different clusters of these high value guests in terms of these different traits. Agreeableness, that this green cluster is low in agreeableness and extroversion, high in openness, and then you've got a red cluster over here that's low in conservation and conscientiousness, high in neuroticism, and that blue cluster is high in agreeableness and conservation. So there seem to be different subgroups that this company didn't know about before, and maybe those people should be treated differently, made different kinds of offers, sent different kinds of messages. Okay, that's the average total spend annually for the customers in that category. And interestingly, we also see different. I mean, when I break it down into different product categories, I see that some of these clusters seem to buy. One cluster. In one case, I think it seemed to be discovering the difference between men and women, because one of the clusters was bought more menswear than the other, and the other one bought more makeup than the other. And I thought, oh, okay. So we're discovering some things that they probably already know about in terms of gender, perhaps, but it's interesting that it's coming out in the language use as well. And so yeah, okay, so then the idea of upsell. Well, can we find, for a given person who spends a lot of money, can we find somebody similar to them who isn't spending a lot of money, but who's just like them personality-wise in the inferred traits, and maybe that is a good target for this upsell. And certainly, when you look at it, you can say, oh, well, we can find these people. We can find lots of people who are similar to them in these different categories. And if you could actually bring the potential people up to the high value category, then you're looking at maybe you could increase the sales for each person by 2,000 for everyone that you transition from a moderate value to a high value. So this has great potential, but of course that's an experiment that they have to run. So I mean, we built classifiers for all kinds of different categories, fans of different brands, and in some cases, we got moderate precision or low precision. In some cases, a lot of times we could get in the low 60s for distinguishing people who like a particular brand versus people who don't like a particular brand, and in some cases higher than that. So encouraging results, especially in retail, where even moving things by a percentage can be a big help. So that's the end of my examples. So I think to wrap things up, where are we going now? Well, one thing is that the user group got pulled into Watson Innovations because they want Watson to be able to understand people as well as understand facts. Watson is really good with facts, but maybe different people need facts presented in different ways. So perhaps we can help inform Watson's ability to present information and engage with people better. But we're working on delivering something to Watson, and at the same time understanding how to fix, how to understand this whole process better. I mean, as the August work showed, the personality model worked well for 80% of the population, but how do you detect and address the remaining 20%? How can we deal with non-humans and actually detect those and remove that source of noise? What new features can we infer? What are the differences between social media and email, say, or call center transcripts? There are lots of places where people are communicating using language, and how can we make our models work well in all of them? How about, instead of just applying this to individuals, can we evaluate the traits of online communities? And even one person in the group is looking at evaluating the features of images that are posted online. If you post lots of images of cats, does that mean you're a different type of person than you post pictures of people or pictures of outdoor scenes? So I think the bottom line here for my talk is that psycholinguistics of social media data can really predict real-world behavior, even with a very noisy data source like Twitter. And most of the analysis that had gone on before this was based on topics and sentiment, on what people were talking about. But here, it doesn't matter what they're talking about, it's topic independent. It's all about how they're saying it, what kinds of language they're using. And it provides a way to better understand people, and perhaps improve marketing, make marketing less wasteful, less annoying. And not just linguistic, but also behavioral aspects are important. And then finally, I want to start or finish where I began, which is that if you're going to do work like that, I think it's important to consider privacy once you start engaging with people in the real world. So that's the end of my talk. I can actually model people. I can come up with a profile if you've got a Twitter account. And I can also answer questions. Yes?
So, another quick question, because I know that in social computing, when they're trying to do product reviews, they run into a lot of problems because no matter what incentive-based system they pick, what the theory says and what they actually do in a particular instance, it completely lines their results. Because people will always figure out what to get maximize profit and not really give you what you want, is that sort of distribution of responses. So in your answers to the Twitter, do you try to compare what their answers are and how they're converging to maybe an actual incentive base in terms of money?
I'm not certain I'm understanding your question, but I think in terms of answers on Twitter, we weren't actually looking at the content of the answers. We were more interested in whether or not they'd answer at all, and being able to predict that. And similarly, with any kind of engaging with people on Twitter, the question is, are they interested? Do you actually resonate with them? Can you find a message that works for them or an offer that works for them? So we haven't been doing any topic analysis on or analysis of the content of people's responses.
So you wouldn't consider a more complex incentive system to get more responders to increase your response?
I mean, I think we're a ways from that level yet. I think we're still working on the fundamentals of inferring traits and understanding what the traits mean in different domains. Yes?
Okay, we're talking about upsell. What are the differences with doing the same for political campaigns?
Well, I mean, from everything I heard, the last political campaign had amazingly sophisticated profiling and targeting of people and measuring of response rates. But I don't know where they got all their data in terms of, if you've got, I don't know, it was something like 30 or 50, the Obama campaign had 30 or 50 different categories that they placed people in, but I haven't found the information as to how they decided that somebody fell into a certain category. I don't know whether they bought that data from data resellers. I don't think that they were inferring it from online activity. I think that this is sort of a way of filling in gaps in terms of using online activity to infer extra traits and being more accurate in your assessment of who somebody is. And politics is just marketing in another realm. So, but yes, that's something that I'm certainly interested in, but I don't know any details of the political side of things. Yes?
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more about going from some tweets to a personality profile? How do you go from here to there? Is it just term frequencies, and then how do you?
Okay, so the approach usually for most of our models use this dictionary called LIWC, L-I-W-C, which divides English into 68 categories. So everything from different types of pronouns, adverbs, adjectives, words about food, words about family, words about work, swear words, all these different categories of words, and what the mapping is just a series of coefficients. So you look at the preponderance of swear words, and maybe there's a coefficient for that number related to agreeableness, and then the more the swear words, the lower the agreeableness.
So they've already done that mapping?
Yes. So we've built models of this kind, and we've also used other people's models already built of this kind, where you build the models by saying, okay, let's give people personality tests and analyze their writing. And you can just do linear regression, and you get all these coefficients, and then you have a model, and then you try and see if the model is actually predictive of behavior, which is a lot of the work that we do.
Sure. Just one comment following up on that. It is very interesting though. Tweets are how people act, and a personality test is how people see themselves.
I think the mechanism by which a personality test works. I mean, there are different kinds of personality tests, but they all involve some kind of self-reflection, where they say, here are 2 words, which resonates more with you, or given this question, how, on a scale of 1 to 5, how strongly do you agree with this? So it's about self-reflection, and I think a lot of social media activity is similar to that. It's people thinking about themselves in relationship to other people, which is why I think this works at all.
Yeah, maybe your outliers are people who think of themselves one way, but really act very differently.
Yes, and I think that's there are interesting potential studies in terms of, well, okay, how does somebody's contributions on IBM Connections communities differ from where their work-related environment compared to their Twitter-related environment or Facebook, or how does short-form writing compare with long-form writing, and personal email versus work email? Many experiments that remain to be done that hopefully can improve the precision of these approaches. So.
Yeah, we're beginning to get comments from people online, and they would want us to repeat questions.
Okay, yes.
But we have
my
question
apologies for not repeating the questions.
We have a question from one of them, is from Ching Hua. She wants to know whether we can use the kind of language that people use in work email to build a psycholinguistic model of the person's professional personnel, and how useful do you think this will be?
Okay, so the question related to whether work email could be used for making these types of predictions. And I think possibly, but we haven't tested it. So, according to Pennebaker, these linguistic differences are subconscious. And so, so it's certainly possible that even in work email, these features will come out, but we haven't tested it, so we don't know. And of all the data you can get at within IBM, email is the hardest to get. So that would require a very carefully designed study that we haven't done so far. Yes?
Have you varied the language in your questions to see the outcome of your response?
So the question was if we've varied the language in our questions to see the different responses. And that is something that we tried with the travelers study. And what we found is that we didn't have enough responses to tell whether there was a difference in response rates to different messages based on personalities, because there are too many dimensions there. And we're thinking about collecting more data so that we could understand that. But we don't know the answer to that yet. We suspect it should be true that people with different personalities will respond to different types of messages. If you are motivated by helping other people, then you're going to respond to a different message than if you're motivated by improving your social status. But we don't have the proof of that so far. Yes?
I was a little bit curious about the correlation with the magazine and the going to the retail store.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, do you think it is likely that it is because what the magazines are feeding the subscribers, or is it because why the subscribers are following the magazines in the first place? Or could it be the other way? I mean, like, because they go to the retail stores, that's why they are following the magazines? Would it have those sort of relations as well?
So, let's see. I think, so the question related to the magazine followers. So I'm not sure I understand the question, so let me give you a little bit of explanation and then ask you to ask the question again. So the store did a focus group, and it looked at people who bought clothing, and it divided the. Eventually, the outcome of that focus group was it said, well, we have 3 broad categories of people. And interestingly, category 1 reads these magazines, category 2 reads these magazines, category 3 reads these magazines. So I think that certainly magazine readership is different. I mean, that there are different magazines aimed at different types of people. And I guess I'm not surprised that that different types of people will use language differently. That somebody who's really interested in high fashion might work very different, might express themselves very differently from somebody who likes the idea of fashion but is kind of overwhelmed by the whole thing and just doesn't have time for it. So can you, in that context, express your question again?
In that context, I was asking whether or not what they find in the magazine, I mean, they're reading the magazines maybe every month, every day. So is that what influences their behavior, you think, or is it because why they're following the magazine in the first place, because these are the things that interest them? So there's that both-way relation.
Okay, so I think the question is whether the magazine influences the people or whether it's the other way around. I suspect that it is the intrinsic characteristics of the people that make them like the magazine and also makes them express themselves in a certain way on Twitter that is measurably different. So but I don't have proof of that. That's just my own belief, is that it's the characteristics of the people coming out in both their behavior in buying a magazine and in their language use. Anything else? Oh, thank you very much. We are on the leading edge of this. At least, so there are some university groups that are working on this. But
Where is the meeting?
Well, I think that people haven't thought about this as an approach until recently. And so I believe that I mean, so one of the things I found is that the data resellers are happy to sell you data. Let's say I want to buy some tweets from one of these data resellers. I can get tweets from a geographical area. I can get tweets that contain certain terms. I can get tweets that are believed to be from people in certain demographics. But well, the reseller will ways to me, or will sell them. But the thing is, none of the resellers will sell you all the tweets for an individual. You have to go through this very convoluted process to get all the data for a particular individual. Also, I asked her about advertising. I said, well, could I promote a tweet to a list of 1,000 people? And they said, no, they don't support that.
2%, at all.
Well, I mean,
It's 10% of tweets, not 10%.
Right, it's 10%. It is a random 10% of all tweets, and from what I've heard, it's actually 12.5%. So I think they're just taking a lower order bit, and saying, "Oh, I want 1/8 of everything." So, yeah. It is licensable, and we have a license for applying it. There's also a software package you can buy from Minutemaker for $50 and apply it to text.
Well, yeah, no, yeah,
Yeah, so we certainly have our own implementations of Luke that we can share. So.
Well, they have implementation didn't derive from the dictionary.
No, it uses it. It's our implementation.
They use it.
Right, because the thing he sells is hard to use because it's a standalone program that you can't interface to other systems. And we have code that you can just plug in as a library.
and it's just a matrix of one dimension is all your words, and that's all your personality traits.
More or less, yeah. Or, well, I mean, one is a dictionary, and then the next step is mapping from a dictionary to different traits.
To take your words from like
Yes.
a dictionary and then
Yes.
cool. Interesting work. Thank you.
It's a version of the doc I gave it in forms, and also ancestry.com, the confidential side.
Right. Oh, I did notice that there was a slide there with the short brands in it.
Yeah, and so it would be possible to infer from that, but I mentioned that this is actually confidential,
Yes.
so I figured I didn't have time to change that. I decided to add that. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Now I get to put on my brag sheet that I'm distinguished. Well, I mean, I think, at this point, because this is just coming out of research, we've done a number of different research projects around this. So one of them was looking at IBM Connections communities and seeing whether you could predict member satisfaction with the communities from the linguistic patterns in the communities, and there are some cases where that is the case. And, but we don't have sort of, it's not like